we are going to be broadcasting via YouTube. We've been broadcasting by Facebook for several years now, off and on, and I want to thank the Lord for giving us this opportunity to reach those who cannot be here physically at Silica Springs. For just a service, I want you to consider yourself to be a member here, and I want to thank God for allowing us to be able to come to you by way of technology. If you have your Bible with you, if you will, turn to the book of Lamentations. The book of Lamentations, chapter number 1. Lamentations, chapter number 1. As we come to the Word of God, I want to remind you that this week has been one that has been full of things that we have never seen before. There has never been a time in the history of the world that the things that have gone from so good of an economic situation to so poor of a situation has happened in so quick of a time. I don't want to add to fear-mongering. I don't want to add to false alarms or raising things that do not need to be raised, but I believe that somebody needs to preach about the current state of our country and our world. With that being said, if I can direct you to Lamentations chapter 1. Now, let me explain the book of Lamentations to you. You cannot properly get a hold of what's happening in this book until you realize what happened in the book prior to this, the book of Jeremiah. Both of them were written under the inspiration of God by the prophet Jeremiah. And the book of Jeremiah contains 52 chapters where he begs, pleads, and cries to the people of God, the Jewish nation, that they get right with God, and yet they refuse. They had a prophet in the man Jeremiah. They had a prophet in the man Isaiah, in Amos, in Habakkuk. I could go on and on of the ones that stood and said, "What thus saith the Lord." And when they would cry aloud and spare not and lift up their voice like a trumpet, the people heard it as it were a song, and it literally was ignored. And when the judgment of God fell heavy upon the nation, it was so bad that these 5 chapters of the book of Lamentations was written that you might understand the type of woe that has befallen them. It is so bad of a circumstance that you'll never find another time in history for the nation of Israel that food was in such short demand that they were actually selling dove's dung to be eaten. In fact, 3 different scriptures tell about how that some of the poor, miserable ladies sodden down their own children. They went all the way to the point of cannibalism of their own children. Now, I want to tell you, those times are bad when the people of God are to the point that that has happened. I want to read to you what it says in this Lamentations chapter 1 and verse 1. Remember, the city of Jerusalem is the pinnacle of life, both religious and social and nationally, for the nation of Israel. The city of Jerusalem is looked at as being, if you will, the bright and shining city upon a hill. Here in verse number 1, how doth the city sit solitary, that was full of people? How has she become a widow? She that was great among the nations and princes among the provinces, how is she become tributary? She weepeth sore in the night, and her tears are on her cheeks. Among all her lovers she hath none to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They are become her enemies. When the nation of Israel experienced the judgment that Jeremiah preached about throughout those 52 chapters, you could write the title of the book of Lamentations as being When the Chickens Come Home to Roost. I want to tell you this. There has never been, nor I believe ever will be, in the time that is described in the prophecy of the Bible as a land like the United States of America. There has never been a nation that rose up so quickly and was used of God so extensively to get the gospel out, to send missionaries to foreign lands, to be a friend to Israel, to have the type of the witness that this country had in time past. No, never another nation besides the United States of America. There has never been a world power that has had the type of freedom that has been afforded to the United States citizen. Because of this, while even during this trying time, there is still a sense of freedom among our citizens and those who may be watching in the United Kingdom, in Italy, and in other lands across the world right now. They're having to get special permission. They're having to get letters of authority. They're having to call and get special permit numbers to just leave their house under quarantine. This has been a land that God has blessed without exception and without reservation. I say that this land has been blessed of God. But to whom much is given, much is required. And much of the prosperity that we have enjoyed has become our downfall, and now our chickens have come home to roost. I want you to notice here how it says in verse number 1, how doth the city sit solitary? I want to take the things that happened with Jerusalem, and I want to show you how that America today is having its chickens to come home to roost. Do you realize what we've done in this world? In this country, we have so thumbed our nose and halted our head up at the things of God. We treat church like it's an option. Most of the time, we look at our being with our family as being more important than being in the house of God. When people think about what they're going to do, for as far as their free time is concerned, they run off to the mountains, they run off to the beach, and they decide, I am going to enjoy the pleasures and the good times, and I'll treat church like it's a secondary thought. We've worshiped our own prosperity. Our ball teams that we worship, the stadiums now stand empty. I like what that one preacher said. He had family that kept running off to this ball team and this away game and to this travel ball and to this tournament and to this. And he said, did you say y'all were going to play ball or going to play Baal? They had worshiped that thing like it was the god of Baal of the Old Testament. And now what's happened? They're not even... there's not anyone today in any of the stadiums. God has knocked that God that you worshiped off of his pedestal. Many people worship their financial situation. And in just a couple of weeks' time, that 401k that you searched every day looking at it, coveting what you were going to be able to do some grand day, is no longer what it used to be. He's knocked that little God off of his pedestal. In this, I think about how that alcohol has flown through our land freely. And all of these preachers with lace around their drawers has forsaken the preaching against the sin of drinking alcohol. We have loved our pleasure more than we have loved God. We have desecrated the Lord's day. We've made it a day to go out and to do whatever. We see people that would never have listened. They never would have cut grass on a Sunday. Now they take time off from church just to catch up with their house chores. We see the Lord's day has been desecrated and has been turned to the things of the Lord, and we wonder why our city now sits solitary. I think about the number of churches this morning that did not meet. I think about the number of times that we had the opportunity to come to the house of God, to come and worship in spirit and in truth, and we just let it pass by, and now you can't go. I think about what it means to have looked upon us and realized how unholy and profane it has been for us to act in the manner that we have acted, and how that every person is turned to their own pleasure and to their own God, and our chickens have come home to roost. For some of you that don't realize just how bad a shape we're in, amen? This past Tuesday, police came to a church in Louisiana and told them they needed to disperse. They had more than the allotted people, and if they assembled today, that the organizer, meaning the pastor, would be arrested. North Carolina, certain areas of it has already been told, if you show up and there's more than the allotted number of people, you'll be ticketed for unlawful assembly. I'm told that in the state of Florida, that a certain well-known national politician called some churches and said, you need to go ahead and lead the way, and you need to shut down on Sunday, and if not, we may have to come in and close you down. Do you realize when the government steps in and says, you can't assemble? That is the First Amendment, the right to assemble, the right to worship God. And when you trample on it, you trample on the blood of all of those martyrs, all of those heroes who shed their blood and spilled their blood in foreign lands, that we might have a constitution that you could come and worship God freely. In this great nation that we're in, we now sit solitary. Many of you are watching by way of the internet, and you're sitting at home. You haven't had physical contact with someone in days, and now you would go to church, but something has happened. I think about how that the greatest economy ever, you look at the financial gains that this country had, somewhere near 30,000 on the Dow Jones mark just a few weeks ago. And now in the last week, and regardless of how much money you had, you couldn't buy a roll of toilet paper to save your life. You know what's happened? We've had the chickens come home to roost. I think about how that those that looked at their retirement and they said, you know what? I've got this that's going to be there. In 1 week, it is tumbled by 1/3. All of the investments that you made during the Trump era are gone. And listen, I don't know if they will be back. If they do, I believe that it will soar to a height like none other. But you know what? We might be just like Israel in the first days of the captivity. When they heard the first yell of war from their fields along the side of that city of Jerusalem, I wonder if they said, we'll be okay this time next week. That siege of the siege of the Babylonians won't last long, but now we look back, it lasted some 70 years of captivity. I think about how that if you look into Walmart, the places that we have gone to buy the basic necessities. I had one man this morning told me that he has searched for 2 days to find bread. I was in a grocery store just yesterday, and a fella had a pack of pork chops, and he said that's all there was. There was no more. You know what? Now, in major cities, Walmart trucks have to have police escorts to make it to their destination. They're telling their drivers, when you get there, get out of your truck, abandon it, forsake it, and get out of the way. If you are raided, don't try to save anything. Run for your life. You know what? Our chickens have come home to roost. I cannot sit here and say we are undeserving in all of this. 4,000 babies a day were dying in abortion clinics. And we wouldn't even blush. I think about how that we have turned to a nation that's all about me and my pleasure. I see how we have forsaken God, and now we have layoffs and shutdowns that's going on all across our land. This is the ones locally. Some of them, and just a short list, is BMW, Michelin, Hamrick's, and many others. I've had family this past week to get the layoff notice that many of you have gotten. And I want to tell you, it can get worse. And you know what? If it does, we've got it coming. Our chickens have come home to roost. I think about how we have opposed authority. We have despised government. We have hated God, and we've been proud, haughty, and vain. We have had the pleasure of sin. We have loved it, and we have thumbed our nose at God and said, we will not have Him to reign over us. I see how that the Bible also says in this Lamentation chapter 1 about how, if you'll notice in verse number 1, it ends by saying, how has she become tributary? That's paying tribute. That's paying taxes. That's, if you will, being controlled by another. I say this. If you'll look at our basic necessities, 80% of our prescriptions are made in China. Now, listen, I want to tell you this. Regardless if it's China or if it's Russia or if it's one of our own political parties involved in it, I want to tell you there's somebody else pulling the strings behind those governments. And it might be that justice is finally being served. Our chickens have come home to roost. I do believe with all sincerity that this has been something that is a deliberate thing that has happened. You can't tell me that Donald J. Trump comes into office and all of a sudden now you have the nation of China having to pay in 9 months' time last year $67 billion in tariffs, and them not be upset about it. That you can't tell me that where the city of Wuhan, China is, that just happens to be the location of the Chinese government's virology laboratory, that's the center of the breakout of this, that they weren't behind it. And just to make sure that we hit all of the characters involved, I believe that China's in on it. And at the same time, this is the first time in decades we've been energy independent. We have not been buying oil from any of those in the Middle East. We cut them off, and we have started producing our own oil, and we were energy independent up until this. Our own people were buying of gas from other Americans. That means the money stays here. And then all of a sudden, Russia and Saudi Arabia get into a big war together over who's going to provide gas to Ukraine. Now, think about who was on the Ukrainian gas board. Hey, y'all heard that here lately? I want to tell you this. When you had the Saudi prince and then the Vladimir Putin get into it, the Saudi prince said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to open up all of our oil reserves and flood the market. Now, up here next to Grover, I'm told you can get gas for 99 cents a gallon. Do you know what's happening now? Now, our gas companies, American-owned, aren't producing gas. So now we're back to buying gas from the Middle East. Okay? Imagine, isn't it a coincidence that all that just happened at once? Oh yeah, and it's election time in the United States. I smell a rat, and I want to tell you something. Our chickens have come home to roost, but I can tell you what God has used to make this happen. It's a collusion against the United States because we had a president that finally said we're putting our country first. We are tributary. We have been reliant on others too long, and we need to cut them off. Amen. I see as you go through and you'll watch this unfold on our news, how that now the most of the masks for this type of thing are owned by China, and they won't release them because they say they need them. I thought everybody was fine over there now. Why do they still need them if everybody was fine over there now? Is it a thing that they just don't want us to be in the clear? They like this, where that way it keeps the uproar up, and I guarantee you there'll be an October surprise before the November election, or I'll eat your dirty socks. Our chickens have come home to roost. We're tributary. We have been given these things where our traffic has come down significantly, and our treaties have been ignored. You know what? I thought we were supposed to be friends now with China. I thought the big bear was no longer going to be up there in Russia. What happened to all of those changes? You know what? It seems like the Bible might be true. Gog and Magog, you'll know that's going to be China, that's going to be Russia. They're going to be all involved in the last days when they march down there to Jerusalem and they try to surround the remnant of God there. And why are they there on horseback? Because the oil has run out. I see this is all coming together. I do believe in the rapture of the church. Thank God for it. We'll be gone before the worst of the worst, but it might get bad before they pull us out. I saw just last night, William Barr, Department of Justice, how that he is asking that habeas corpus be suspended during the national emergency of this virus. For those of you that are not familiar with that, that is the doctrine of you have the body. We must hurry with your hearings and make sure that you get a speedy and fair trial. That does not sound like much, but when you are locked up and you can't even make bail until after a national emergency has finished, that is against the Constitution. Our chickens have come home to roost. I think about how, if you'll look, our country, our churches, our basic necessities have all been affected. We were the land of the free, the home of the brave. We still are. But in 3 weeks' time, it's turned. The most prosperous economy in the world, in history. In 3 weeks' time, we're scrounging together, trying to find toiletry products, food, and wondering if any of us are going to have a job the next week. Our chickens have come home to roost. Will God turn it? I don't know. Will God bring a revival? I don't know. But I want to tell you this. Until we earnestly seek God's face and we repent of the sins, that's just not saying I'm sorry, but we get so sick of where we have been at and what we've been doing, and we get so thirsty for God, we don't stand a chance. I want to tell you something. I feel like I am going to be physically ill when I'm not here in this church, when we're meeting. It's a feeling like I'm missing my family. And how some can just come and go. It's all right. You might not have a chance to go back. Those of you that may be watching, you might have met for the last time. If the next 3 weeks are as turbulent as the last 3, you might as well hide that Bible. They'll be for them next. Pray like never before that maybe God will turn his hand. I don't know if he will or not, but I'm going to seek him like I never have before. Let's all stand with every head bowed, every eye closed. The chickens have come home to roost.